So this is lesson one, I suppose, of the Fusion 360 lessons I'm trying to record for you. Lesson 0 should be watched first because I talk about the names and a little bit of introduction to functions of some of the things you see on the screen. What we're going to do now is we're going to make our first part. Our first component is actually what they call them. And what they actually prefer you to do, and it should be a habit you should get into. I'm bad about not doing it because the way Fusion 360 works is a little bit different than the way SOLIDWORKS works. But what they actually should always do when you're first starting a project is go over to Assemble and choose New Component. Okay, you want to give it a name, and we're just going to call this Part 1 of Intro Lessons. Just call it Part 1 of Intro Lessons. Doesn't really matter. Don't worry about any of these other things. It's a standard part. I don't internal, external. I don't even know what that means. From bodies, I don't know. Activate, though, you do want to have checked, because what that does is it tells you you can have multiple components in the same design. Basically, they're individual parts. And when you're working on the design, you need to tell it which component you're actively editing. And so in this case, we're going to activate this, and I'm going to say OK. And so what that does, if you look in your browser, it installs the part here. Now, if you click the down arrow here, it has its own origin. Remember how we talked about there was the origin? This is the origin for the assembly or design. This is the origin for this individual part. So if you end up moving this part around in the assembly, then those origins will not be on top of each other. They start off in the same location. All your planes and everything start out the same. It's kind of a weird detail for you first starting, but just get in the habit of assemble, component, give it a name, and make sure it's active. You'll know it's active because of that little dot right there. You'll notice if I go up here to this and click on it, that dot is empty. If I wanted to make the whole project active, then I would click here and I would be editing in a different way. Don't worry too much about what that means right now. Just make sure that this one is the active component. But you'll notice that when we created the component, it made a new entry in the browser, and it has its own origin and drop-down menu and that sort of thing. Likewise, down here in our timeline, if I hover over this, it shows you we created Part 1 of Intro Lessons. So there's your first part, shows up. So that was an activity that we did, and it keeps a record of that. Now, this first part, what we want to do, I need to explain to you very briefly that components in most CAD software, especially Fusion 360 and SOLIDWORKS, are always built by doing two things. First, you'll make a two-dimensional figure, what they call a sketch. It's called a sketch in both Fusion and in SOLIDWORKS. A sketch, a two-dimensional drawing. And then you take that two-dimensional drawing and you give it a third dimension by doing what are called features. So the phrases sketches and features are going to come up over and over and over again. I'm going to talk about sketches and features. So to begin any part, we're going to have to start a sketch. So go up here and you look in this menu, and again, make sure you're in Design and you're on Solid, and you will go to Create Sketch. Now when you do that, what it wants to do is say, well, where does this sketch live? What surface, what two-dimensional surface do you want it to live on, to be on? And in this case, we can see that the origins that were hidden for the parts before show up briefly when you activate the sketch. And there's the, that would be the same as the front plane. This coincides to this. This is the top plane. This coincides to that. And this is the left plane. This coincides to, well, the side we can't see. It's opposite the right side of this part. So those are your default planes. Now, again, you might have, when you hover over the top plane here, this is actually the XY plane for me. It's red axis and green axis are the two axes that form the boundary of the origin for that. That's the plane I'm going to draw on. So you have to click one of these planes. The point is, when you start a sketch, you have to choose a plane to put it on. I'm going to put it on the XY plane. Yours may be an XZ plane or a YZ plane here as the top of your part. Please don't fret about it. We're going to go and set preferences when we're together in the classroom. But click that. And now some things happened. Some important things happened. First, it changed my view so that I'm looking perpendicularly to that plane that I selected. Secondly, it changed my menu up top. And you'll notice over here to the far right, this is a very important thing. This is the Finish Sketch button. This allows you to complete your sketch when you're done. So always remember to finish your sketch before you move on to making a feature, for instance. Also, you'll notice here are what I call the sketch tools. These are the standard ones for creating sketch entities, lines and curves. Also over here, these are the constraints. We'll talk about constraints more in a bit, but these are constraints. You can intentionally add constraints, although often when you're creating sketch entities using the sketch tools, it will automatically apply some constraints. Another thing you might notice is down here at the bottom, there is a sketch now appeared in our timeline, and over here in the browser, a sketch menu shows up underneath this component. So lastly, over here, a sketch palette shows up. We will not use the palette a lot, but we will a few times, so be aware that that pops up when you start a sketch. We're going to do a really simple sketch. We're going to create a center diameter circle. So I'm going to click on this here. If, for some reason, you do not have this on your menu here, like this right here, click the down arrow under Create, go to Circle, come over to Center Diameter Circle, and there are these three dots here. When you click on those three dots, you have Pin to Toolbar. When you choose that, it repopulates it up here. So hopefully that's already living here for you, and so all you have to do is click it once. That activates it. You know it's active because it turns blue, because your cursor changes. You'll notice it has like a disc next to it, and your sketch palette changes as well. It shows you your different options for ways of making circles, but we have chosen the center diameter circle. So the way we use this is you move it to where you want the center to be, and then you notice it'll actually snap to the origin, which is what I want you to do. So when you get near the origin, let it snap to the origin. See the little blue square around it. Click once, just tap your keyboard, your mouse pad or whatever, and move your finger away. And then slide away from the origin. You can see it gets bigger and smaller as you slide it away. It does give you a preview of the diameter that you're working with right there. I don't really ever pay much attention to that. I mean, sometimes I'll try to get it approximately. So let's say we wanted to make a 2-inch diameter circle. I might go to here like 2.117. Click a second time, and that has established this circle. So this creates a circle of indeterminate size whose origin is at the origin of the part, and that lies on this green and red plane, the XY plane in this case. You can change the size of this, but right now, if you notice, my cursor still looks the same as it did before, and this is still highlighted. I still actually have this circle tool on. So if I were to click a second time and drag and click a third time and drag and click a fourth time, I'd make yet another circle. I don't want to do that though. So to get out of the circle tool, I'm going to, on my keyboard, click the top left button, the escape button, and that turns off that tool. Now, you'll notice if I hover over the edge, I can click and drag. If you click and drag, you can change the size of this thing. It's no longer giving me a preview, so I have no idea what size this thing is. Your dimensions are pretty important as an engineer, so you do want to give this an exact dimension. One way to do that is come over here to Sketch Dimension. If you look under your tools, there's this thing that looks like this. Again, if you don't have it, click the Create arrow, come down to Sketch Dimension, click on the three dots, choose Pin to Toolbar. But hopefully it's still there. If you activate this tool, it allows you to now, and notice my cursor changed, I can now come and click the edge of this circle once, one click and release. I can move my mouse away a little bit, and it gives me a place to put a dimension for me to read later. I like my dimensions here in the kind of upper right-hand corner, so I'm going to click a second time to place the dimension. So your first click selects the sketch entity. Your second click places the dimension somewhere on your screen, and then you can type in the value you want. I'm going to put 2. Default on this is inches because I had already done that before. If you recall, at the in lesson 0, I'd gone here and set my default units to be inches. So that's inches. It doesn't say inches, but it is. So that's 2. I hit 2, hit enter. I got a 2-inch circle on the XY plane whose center is on the origin. Notice it is no longer blue. The reason it's no longer blue is because there's nothing you can change about that circle now. It knows precisely where it is, the computer does, and it knows precisely the size of it. There's literally nothing more we can add to the sketch, so I'm going to come up and click Finish Sketch. So at this point, I have a circle, sketch. Here's the sketch down here on my timeline. So I created a part, component. I created a sketch. That sketch it has some information about it. If you come over to the browser and you click the down arrow, it shows you this is called Sketch 1. I can actually hide that sketch. Ooh. It's still there. I just kind of hid it by clicking the eyeball. Sort of like I can make the origin stuff up here, or I can hide those. So there's a sketch. It's on this green and red plane. Yours might be blue and red. Don't worry about it. Now what we're going to do with that sketch is to make it into a 3-dimensional body. And the way you typically make sketches into 3-dimensional items is by doing what are called features. Revolve is a feature we'll get to eventually. There's pattern features and hole features and mirror features and other pattern features. And again, your menu might not be the same as mine. Here's the one we want right now, is the extrude feature. Again, I'm going to say it a 3rd time, and then I'm not going to mention it again, that if an item is not for some reason in your quick access toolbar, and that you can remove them by clicking and dragging them and just releasing them, they'll go away. You can always add them back by going to the down arrow on the create menu, finding the item, clicking on the 3 dots and choosing pin to toolbar, and it will repopulate it. What was the other one I got rid of? I don't even remember right now. It's not one I use much, so I can leave it out of there. Anyway, so we want the extrude. So if you activate the extrude feature, again, 3 things happen. 1, it begins to do something over in your browser. It's hard to tell what it is right now. 2, it does something down in your timeline. 3, it brings up the pop-up. Now, on extrusions, on features, as opposed to sketches, which are 2D, on features, your 3rd dimension, it brings up this dialog box. There's a lot of parts to this dialog box. We're not going to worry about any of them right now, but we will eventually learn all of them. All we're going to do now is we're going to come over to this arrow right here, and I'm going to click and drag straight up. Click and drag straight up. You'll notice that it gives us a dimension thing here. I could also click and drag down if I wanted to extrude in the other direction. You'll notice when I go down, I get negative numbers, and when I go up, I get positive numbers. Generally, I don't do the click and drag thing. There's also this where you can change it to be a cone and stuff with angles in here. I don't want that, so I'm going to go over here where this taper angle was changing and make that go back to 0. I really don't want a taper to this. So that guy there is not a great thing to click on. But you'll notice these numbers here. I'm going to put in a number. I'm going to put in the number 5. No, I don't like that. Let me backspace. Let me put in the number 3. There we go. So I have a 3-inch tall cylinder, solid body here created with no taper angle. The same information is over here, and let's just click OK. So now we have created our very first body. You'll notice over here, bodies. This body, if we click the down arrow, is the only body here. If I hide it, the body hides. I can show a sketch. I can show a body. I can show just the body without the sketch. I can show none at all. It's all about clicking the eyeball things, but you usually want to leave your bodies visible. We do have reasons we make them invisible later on. I'll show you, step by step, baby steps. Obviously, we can change which way we look at this thing by going to our our view cube and clicking and dragging. I can click directly on something and it goes right to a view perpendicular to any of these things. I can rotate my views around the axis coming straight out of the thing here. I can click home. I can come down. Oh, let me show you this. If you take 2 fingers and you push away from you, or maybe toward you, it depends on your preferences, it can zoom in, or 2 fingers the other way, it can zoom out. Notice if I zoom in way over here far enough, wait a minute, where's my part? I don't know where my part is. Where'd it go? I click this and I roll around. I can't see. I don't see it anywhere. Where did it go? Don't panic. That's what fit is for. Fit is wonderful. So again, in lesson 0, I talked about this down arrow here. Make sure you've chosen fit. Fit will always zoom it to be in and zoom it to fit the screen as well. So if you zoom in too much and you don't know what you're looking at, click fit and it'll make your part appear on the screen. Similarly, if you've done something silly, you've zoomed in a bad place, you can click the home button. And if you made your part match the origin, as we did at the beginning of this, it will also get you there. So that's a little bit of just how to make a sketch and how to do an extrusion and the effect it has on your timeline and your browser and on your menus. More about this later. There's some very deep messages I need to deliver, but 15 minutes is enough for one video. I'll pause this one now.